Hey everybody, I wanted to weigh in on this whole mobile fidelity controversy going on right now. So for those of you who don't know, about 2 weeks ago, it was revealed that Mobile Fidelity, the renowned audiophile record label, that claimed that they used to claim that their pressings were all analog. It's come to light that they have used a digital source when they're pressing some of their albums. Now, not all, but some of them. It's revealed that they were using a digital source. Now, that's a big deal. Why is that a big deal? Because their big claim to fame, and basically what their whole company is based upon, is that they're selling to audiophiles and, of course, non-audiophiles as well, but people that want pure analog sound. Their whole sales pitch is based on this idea that if you're buying a Mobile Fidelity record, that it has been sourced from a pure analog signal. Now, if that's what you're saying, and that's why people are buying your pressings, then that's what you have to be doing. And turns out they have not been doing that. And to put it in very, very simple terms, basically what they're doing is they're taking when they go to make a Mobile Fidelity pressing, they get the original master tape, so they say. I have a little problem with that as well, but let's just pretend that that's right. They get the original master tape, and then based off of that master tape, they then, if depending on what the process is, if it's the one-step process or whatever, they then create a lacquer to press records directly from that master tape. So it's totally analog. I realize I'm kind of saying this kind of in a weird jumbled way, but I'm just trying to give a real basic idea. I'm sure I'm missing some steps, but they take the master tape, they create a stamper, a lacquer, and then they press their records. So it's very pure, allegedly. But now what has come to light is what they're doing is they're taking the master tape, the analog master tape, and creating a digital source of it. And I'm sure it's a very high quality digital source, and I'm sure it probably does sound good to them or whatever. But they're taking that digital source, and then from that digital source, they're then cutting the records. Now, the reason this is a big deal is because it's no longer an all analog signal. You're getting the analog tape, master tape, and converting it to digital. Now, as great as that can be, it is no longer analog. And if you're selling your pressings based on this idea that it's pure analog, and then you're lying or covering up the fact that there is a digital source now within the chain, that's a big, big, big problem, especially when you're charging upwards of $100 or more for just one particular pressing. So this is a very, very big deal. Personally, I think it's absolutely terrible of Mobile Fidelity that they've been doing this. I think there would have been nothing wrong if they had just simply stated, we are getting we're pressing these records from the original master tape, and we are converting it to a high quality digital file, so we're able to press as many quantities as we want. Now, this is another key thing here. So a master tape, an original master tape, it doesn't have an infinite number of times you can play this master tape. If you play it too many times over the tape head, it will lose quality. So record labels or artists that own their own master tapes or whatever, they don't want to give these master tapes out all the time and have them played so people can create new pressings and all that kind of stuff. Because the more you play these tapes, the more they deteriorate over time. So this idea that Mobile Fidelity was able to have these master tapes and play them numerous times, because by the way, when you're making a lacquer, right, based off the master tape, the stamper can only be used so many times before it itself starts to deteriorate. So you have to then go back to the master tape, create another one. So basically, this idea that Mobile Fidelity was claiming to do this, that's why it was so valuable, this idea that they were getting it directly from the master tape and creating these pressings. But so the reason why they'd want to make a digital source, of course, is because they would have the master tape just one time create this digital source. The digital source, you can use that as many times as you want. It's not going to deteriorate because it's digital, of course. But it doesn't have that same quality as getting it directly from the analog source. So anyway, it's a big, big, crazy thing going on right now, and I'm sure you've seen many different videos of people talking about this, people who are way more knowledgeable than I am in terms of just what's actually going on here. But I'm just giving you kind of just the basic idea of what's happening here with this mobile fidelity thing. So my opinion, because I've got a lot of people who've asked me about this, they've sent me the articles and all this kind of stuff, and I've read many articles about it, and I've watched other YouTubers talking about it. My basic opinion on this is I think it's terrible. I think what Mobile Fidelity did and how they've lied to their customers is absolutely awful. And I think that they need to do something to try to make it up to people who've spent tons of money. Because I personally am not a big fan of Mobile Fidelity, so I haven't spent the hundreds of dollars on a lot of their pressings. The pressings I have from Mobile Fidelity are these couple of these Beetle ones, Abbey Road, which I actually do like this. I think it sounds really, really good. Magic Mystery Tour, which is kind of a joke of one, and this is kind of a famous one from Mobile Fidelity. They've messed up many times in the past, and this is one of their biggest mess ups. There's more information on that, by the way, if you want to get deeper into that. But anyway, so these are the couple of Mobile Fidelity pressings that I do own. I have a couple of other artists as well. I have like a Bob Dylan Mobile Fidelity, I think Blood on the Tracks, and I have like a couple of jazz records from Mobile Fidelity as well. That being said, I'm not a big fan of Mobile Fidelity pressings. Generally speaking, while they sound pretty good always, they don't ever sound really bad. I always have found that generally speaking, there are better pressings out there than the Mobile Fidelity pressings. That being said, I think Mobile Fidelity does present a really cool package. The idea that they're taking these classic albums and trying to make them sound as good as they can based off of whatever practices they're using, and releasing them to the public. I think that's all a good thing, of course. But this idea that they've lied to their customers for so long is really, 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 really bad. And I think there's going to be huge repercussions, and I'm curious to see how this all develops. So, yeah, that's just my simple take on this whole controversy, and I'd be curious to know in the comments below what you think. What do you think about this whole controversy? Maybe you are, or were, or maybe you still are, a big fan of Mobile Fidelity and you bought a bunch of their pressings. I know if I was one of those customers that had, over the years, maybe spent upwards of a couple $1,000s on these Mobile Fidelity pressings, I would be very, very disappointed to know that what I thought were true analog recordings now it turns out were sourced from a digital source. That would really, really bother me. I'd have a hard time with that. And that brings me to my last point. This idea that Mobile Fidelity, in a way, it's wrong that they lied about it, but I also can't really blame them, because modern day record pressing, it's very, very hard to create an all analog signal just because the technology doesn't exist. And let me give you an example of why this is. So it's kind of like if you were back in, let's just use, and I'm sure there are train enthusiasts out there who are like, wait a second, but they still exist. But let me just say this. So let's say you wanted to have a steam-powered train. Well, back in obviously the 1800s, it would be super easy to find all the stuff you'd need for a steam-powered train, because that's how trains were back then. That was the technology. Most trains, I shouldn't say all, but probably most trains were running by steam power locomotives. But if you were going to today try to reproduce exactly as it was back in the 1800s, a train like that, you'd probably have a hard time finding all the parts, all the original parts, all the bolts and the nuts, and just making it exactly as it was And of course, you could do it with modern stuff. You could probably do a steam locomotive and make it with modern, but it wouldn't be the same as back in the 1800s. So that's kind of how it is with records, right? So in the 60s and the 70s, at the height of record production, where they were using equipment that now is considered this sacred stuff, right? With like real tubes and just real analog, a total analog signal, all kind of stuff. Back then, it was easy to make records as they were then, and now they still sound good today. But trying to reproduce that exact setup is harder now, because now it's so easy to reproduce things digitally that back then you needed a room full of equipment. Now you can have just one single computer with digital plugins and programs and all that kind of stuff that can do the exact same thing as that analog stuff. But of course, as we know, while it can maybe do that same stuff, it doesn't sound as good as the actual analog equipment. And that's just my opinion, of course, and a lot of other people's opinion too. But so it makes sense why Mobile Fidelity would have such a hard time being able to reproduce these records with an all analog signal, and why they would, use a little bit of a digital source in their chain there. I'm sure I'm rambling on, but what I really wanted to get to my point was, that's why finding original pressings from the 60s and 70s is what most of us are after these days, at least for me. Finding the Beatle pressings from the late 60s and early 70s that were cut by Harry T. Moss. The reason those sound so good is because he's using the equipment from that time period that was meant to be used to press these recordings that were recorded during that same time period. And that equipment, by the way, doesn't exist anymore. Even at Abbey Road, when they went to make the mono remasters, they ended up, I think they weren't able to use the original equipment from like the late 60s and 70s because it didn't exist anymore, or some of it was broken. But they ended up using some machines from like the 1980s, while they were still all analog and it's still all tube. They ended up using them from the 80s just because they were more reliable. So it just shows that it's these records from the 60s and 70s, and maybe even some from the 80s, are very valuable, and that's why it's important to try to hold on to those records, and if you can find them, to pick them up, because they are going away. I will even say, in the last 10 years, I've noticed that, like 10 years ago, it was pretty easy to find, for example, like the Beatles 70s pressings that Harry T. Moss did on the Parlophone, the black and gray label Parlophone records. Those were so easy to find. You could get, a copy of Revolver for like $15, a UK pressing of it. Now they're harder and harder and harder to find, because people are realizing that those sound so good, and they're holding on to them. So anyway, this has been a long little, I went down a different path here, but what I'm trying to say is there's a reason why the 60s and 70s pressings of albums sound so good. It's because the equipment they were using back then was just magical at that time, and most of that equipment doesn't exist anymore. And so that's why when they make modern sounding records, modern pressings of records, they don't sound quite as good as those original recordings from the 60s and 70s. That's not always the case. There are many mastering engineers, like Kevin Gray would be a good example, who are creating modern pressings of records that are amazing. An example of that would be this John Coltrane record that just came out. Pull it out. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to pull it out. This John Coltrane, My Favorite Things pressing is an amazing, amazing sounding pressing. And this is modern. This came out just this year. So it is possible to still make records sound really, really, really great. Anyway, that's it. Hope that maybe gave you a little bit of information about this whole Mobile Fidelity thing. But yeah, like I said, in the comments below, please let me know what you think. And more videos to come. Hope you're all doing well. Take care, and bye for now.